Hey guys, it's Tim, and this is Wrestling Unlimited. As we're here with a special guest today, we have a Jon Finkel with us. He actually wrote the book. You can see it behind him, but I'll put it right here as well. Macho Man, the Untamed, Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage. Now, I read through the book. I just finished it yesterday. So it's a really, really, really good book. It's a long book, I will say. There's a lot to it, but there's a lot of great stories. And I love how in the book you actually talked about how you wanted to start to you figured out like when you said you were 13 to 15 when you first wanted to become an author. So what at that age made you want to be a writer? Like, let's get the people to know you a little bit first.
Yeah, I was the kid, I was huge into sports, baseball, basketball, football. I read Sports Illustrated for kids, like I just devoured it. I grew up in Boston, so I had, the Boston Globe sports section with, some iconic writers, Peter Gammons and Bob Ryan and Jackie McMullen. And so, you kind of come up reading excellent sports writing and writing in general. And that was just what I was always drawn to. I was like the dorky athlete who would like play sports, but also like be the kid on the dugout. Like, did you read this Mickey Mantle biography? You know what I mean? Like that kid. And when you read a lot, eventually you start, thinking of careers in life and what you'd want to do. And I wanted to start writing. I think early on, if I would have said, a staff writer for Sports Illustrated or something, or maybe even a column in one of the big newspapers would have been my dream scenario. Obviously, the internet killed almost all of those things, but I had a good run at magazines in the early 2000s
Okay.
before all this stuff happened. I was a cover story writer for Men's Fitness and Men's Health, and for I was on staff for Muscle and Fitness for a long time. I had a column in GQ, and so I got a good 10 years of when magazines still mattered and people still got them in their inbox, and I got to see my byline, and I did cover stories to kind of move us to Macho. I did cover stories at Muscle and Fitness on a lot of WWE guys, a lot of UFC guys. So I did cover stories on Triple H and Batista and Brock Lesnar and Randy Couture and those kinds of guys. So I had a nice experience of writing for those guys before I'd written almost any books. Macho is my 10th, but that's kind of the background of getting up to where we are.
Okay, because that was gonna be my next question. When I was researching you and I checked out your website and stuff, you have a lot on there with fitness and whatnot. So, like, what's your background with fitness and all that as well?
Yeah, I'm just jacked, dude. I don't know what to say. I'm just kidding. I worked out my whole life. I played football. I swam, which was an interesting combination. So I had to kind of learn a little bit more probably than most of just kids in high school. I would go from, 185, 195 at football to have to try to go down to 175 to,
Hmm.
to compete in swimming. And swimming was actually my far better sport. So I guess I was always just into it then. And then when I moved out to LA right after college, and I started just naturally pitching fitness magazines, Men's Health and Men's Fitness in particular was out there. Joe Weider, who's a legend and built, a lot of Mr. Olympia and all the things that we know now in fitness.
Hmm.
I started writing for them on staff. Like I said, I did articles and cover stories on a ton of more mainstream athletes, football players, basketball players, and things like that. And so I've just always been into it. And I ended up, founding my own Books and Biceps newsletter slash company that I do a lot of writing for every week, every Friday that comes out. And yeah, I just into now that I'm older, in my 40s, I'm into triathlons and doing all those kind of things. And I have a garage gym I call the Flex Factory where I meathead out every morning and bench and squat and all those kind of things. So yeah, just kind of that's where the in fact the Books and Biceps name is like combining my meathead side and my literature side.
So you write in the book, like we already talked about, you were like 13 to 15 when you first wanted to be a writer, and you always wanted to write a biography on the Macho Man Randy Savage. So what as a 13-year-old drew you to Randy Savage?
So I really started following wrestling when I was, 6, 7, really young. I was really into Big John Studd for anyone who's any kind of historian. His peak was almost before and gone. Even Macho Man was there.
Right.
But I used to call myself Little John Studd around the house. I used to wear the white pants like he used to wear. If anyone, you can Google him, and he was on all. Big John Studd was awesome. And then I was like 8 years old, 7, 8 years old at WrestleMania 3. And when Macho kind of came on the scene, he just captivated just me and all my friends. And he was like his moves and his outfits and his sunglasses and everything just drew you to him. And then I don't think I can overstate the impact of being able to do the Macho Man moves. Like I
Mm.
vividly remember my brothers lives near me. We talk about it all the time. I would lay him on a beanbag and just elbow drop off my bed and hit him over and over and over again. And like, you just wanted to be the Macho Man. He just seemed so cool, even though he was a heel. By the time I was too old to even understand, I didn't really boo him with how he treated Elizabeth on purpose in the beginning as a heel.
Mm,
But by the time he came into his own, wrestling with the Mega Powers, getting together, I was all in. Like, I believed all this. So like them getting together was just like my brain was exploding. And then when they broke up and I had to pick a side, I was Team Macho all the way.
right. And so you start off the book itself by talking in the introduction how Lanny Poffo actually passed away about 3/4 of the way through the writing process here. So talk to me about how Lanny helped you with this book and what, you dedicated the book to him. It says right at the beginning, to Lanny. So
Yeah.
what was his impact on you writing the book and all of that, putting everything together?
Yeah, so I put the proposal for the book together maybe 3 or 4 years ago, like you mentioned. I had wanted to do this book for a while. I know what it takes to write a book like this. It's a couple years, hundreds and hundreds of interviews, thousands of pieces of research. You really have to be fascinated with your subject, and you also have to have the desire to do it credibly. And in this case, Lanny was still alive; he's still with us. There was just no way I could see doing this book without feeling like a fraud if I didn't have Lanny at least available to interview. That was all I really wanted. He's
Mm,
not involved contractually. It's not an authorized thing. He didn't have any approval. I just wanted to be able to talk to him. And so it took about a year for me to be able to finally do that. A guy named JP Zarka, who does the blog Pro Wrestling Stories, which is great. I had interviewed him earlier for a different book, 1996, and I reached out, and he and Lanny had done a podcast together, I don't know, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, but they knew each other. And he put me in touch, and it still took a while, but eventually I got in touch with Lanny, and I kind of passed his gauntlet of macho questions, and kind of painted my vision for this book. And I think me being a more of a mainstream author with a bunch of books under my belt
mm.
really helped. I was a journalist first. He liked that. He liked that I had done books on other level, this level icons, Mean Joe Green, the Seattle Supersonics as a whole team, and books like that. And so he knew I wasn't just trying to come in, like some of those documentaries and just hammer home like two or three of the salacious parts of his life, but to really tell his story, to tell the story of the Poffos in general, which is really a wrestling family story,
Oh yeah.
and go from there. And so he meant a lot. He meant a lot to me. I'm not, I don't pretend to have been some longtime friend. I knew him in the last 9 months of his life, but he was extremely generous. He was fun to talk to. He was a great storyteller, and he was proud of his family and his brother. And so it meant the world to me to be able to talk to him, which is why I dedicated the book to him.
So you actually kind of already transitioned me to my next question about the family, the Poffo family. I love how it's not just a story about Randy himself. You actually dived in a lot to the family. What was the process of wanting to talk so much about not just Randy, but Angelo, Judy, Lanny, and the whole family itself?
Yeah, you can't tell a story of somebody if you're going to really do the definitive biography without explaining who the people around him who shaped who they are. All the best biographies, I read a ton of biographies. It's one of my favorite genres to read. And all of them, it could be, a book on Einstein, it could be a book on Teddy Roosevelt or, Martin Luther King. It doesn't matter. The best books start a generation or two prior to the person. How they grew up, how their parents grew up, what shaped them. I mean, you don't need to go back, to ancestry.com and go hundreds of years for a book like this, but it definitely helps to explain at least where his parents came from and what their mindset was, because that's the house he grew up in.
Mhm.
And in this case, it's a very clean storyline because Angelo Poffo was a wrestler. And so it was exciting to kind of understand, whatever your dad did or my dad did or anyone listening to this father's did, you have a familiarity with that. It doesn't matter if they're accountant or architect or they drive a bus, whatever. You kind of get what they do. And for Angelo to bring his children up in a house where he was a professional wrestler, they lived in this town called Downers Grove, just a regular, nice suburb of Chicago. All the dads had regular dad jobs. They ran a pizza shop, and they were teachers, or they ran a small business or worked for a larger company. And then their father, is wearing Speedos and shirts off, and he's, driving around town. All the kids in town knew him because they had a local Sunday morning show that aired the wrestling events. So they all kind of knew that Papo's dad was a bad guy wrestler, and he would play to that in real life and not break character unless the kids were over, playing with their sons and stuff like that. So you have to start there, especially when someone like Randy is shaped by a man who ultimately had a lot of success in the career that he ultimately chose.
So I like the comparison you told in the book about Lanny and Randy as children, as far as their dad being wrestlers. How when kids at school would be like, "Oh, your dad lost again. Your dad's a loser," Lanny would kind of like brush it off. Randy would get in fights and just cause all kinds of chaos about it.
Yeah, Randy had. It seems Lanny told me that Randy had a little bit of a tripwire temper when it came to people mocking not only his dad, in particular, but just saying, if you told Randy wrestling's fake in the third grade hallway, those were fighting words in third grade. You were going to get shoved into the locker and feel how fake it was, and Randy just hated that until he got a little bit older and understood that that was like, every parent, when you get a moment where your kids start to kind of understand the wider world. And so once they hit to be 11, 12, 13, they kind of got that, like, oh, so when a guy says my dad sucks, that means he's doing an awesome job at work. That means he's because it takes a little while for a kid's mind to develop, especially both Lanny and Randy, to be like, okay, our dad's at home. When he's home, he's awesome. He's great. He's generous. Our friends love him. The neighbors love it. Like, he's a good man and he's a good dad. So it doesn't make sense that these people hate him unless he wants them to hate him. And that was a big transition for both the boys. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, there's a lot of articles I found with Judy back in the early 80s, where magazines and newspapers wanted to interview her when he first burst on the national scene, when Macho Man first burst on the national scene. And yeah, I mean, for about 4 or 5 years before Randy kind of got it and got control a little bit of his temper, if you said your dad sucks, you were probably getting punched in the mouth in middle school.
And so that temper kind of seems like not the overarching story here, but basically like what I took away from this, and you can tell me if I totally like got this wrong, but Randy was a very emotional person, wore his emotions on his sleeve. When he got cut from the White Sox and stuff like this, the baseball stuff I didn't know as much of, so that really resonated with me, seeing the what you called metamorphosis coming from baseball going over to wrestling. How he was cut from the White Sox and he ended up destroying the locker room. He then goes to his parents' house, takes all those baseball bats, and as you said, splinters them on the tree in the front yard, like his career had been splintered. And his dad just told him, right, time to go into wrestling. Like that metamorphosis there, as you call it, like I said, was very interesting to me. And it really showed that, Randy, when he got invested in something, he was all in. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, the story is really a story of transformation and perseverance. It's about a man who was, intensely loving baseball first, then moves into something else, and into it. All these stories, all the biographies I try to do, they're human stories, but I pick people who are what I would call one of ones, like unicorn subjects, who really do things that no one else has ever done, and even taken a unique path. And much like Angelo Poffo shaped Randy, his baseball career shaped the way he held his entire wrestling career, the way he approached everything. When he was in high school, he walked around school with a backpack and a baseball bat bag. He brought his bat everywhere. He sat in the back of class to do triceps exercises with a weighted baseball and to squeeze the ball to get forearm work in. They hung a tire outside of his house so he could hit the bat against a tire to strengthen his forearms and his hands. They built a batting cage next to the house in Chicago so we could practice all year long. I mean, this was a focused, driven kid. And it wasn't just that, like, I wanted to play left field for the Red Sox when I grew up. Like, that was just a thing to say. But every single neighbor on the street, everyone who knew Randy, I talked to almost his whole baseball team, his high school coaches, his minor league coaches, like everyone he grew up with. It was just assumed that Randy Poffo would be a Major League Baseball player. He was that good. He hit 500 as a junior, learned to switch hit between junior and senior year, hit 500 again, had no weaknesses at the plate, had a rocket arm at behind home plate. He was a catcher. And then he somehow doesn't get drafted. He had a horrible his pro day back then. Let's be called a pro day now. He had a horrible fever. He had the flu. So he drives, he sends out a letter and a tape to every scout that he can find. And he shows up sick as a dog. I mean, his coach said, he asked him to cancel it. He's like, it's honestly better if you just don't do this, because the impression they're going to have and he tried to buck up. It's just not built that way, and he felt terrible. There was 50 scouts in attendance, and he had the worst game of his whole high school career when all the scouts were there. Like he if you look at his box scores, anyone who watches baseball, and you could find all of them because back then
Right.
papers were everything. It's crazy. It's like 3 for 5, 4 for 5, 2 for 3, 2 for 3, 1 for 3. Just over and over. I mean, this guy didn't miss. He would walk and argue the ball four because he wanted to stay at the plate. All that was like a thing his coaches had to work on him for, is like, take the base, Randy. Like, they're
Right.
giving you the base, and he's like, I want to hit. And so this is a guy, when that didn't happen, he drives down and does a tryout of 300 people for the Cardinals, and they take one guy, Randy. They sign one person, and they say that one of the scouts said it was because, like, how did he stand out? Somebody asked him a couple years later, and he said you could just hear the sound. These baseball scout things, the sound of the ball coming off his bat was ferocious, and it just was
Wow.
different. It had that different thing that you listen for than 299 other guys, right? And so he was just constantly driven, and he seemed to have bottled up that temper for much of his baseball career. Almost everybody I talked to, he was mild mannered,
Mhm.
intense and focused and hardest worker in the room type of guy. But there was no crazy stories about his personality or being a locker room leader, or cutting up the locker room as like a clown. He was just a driven, focused guy.
Yeah, because and so you say, he's got a transition because you go from being a baseball player, you're under 200 pounds. What was he, like 175 or so? And then you look at all these wrestlers when his dad tells him, okay, we're going to get you into wrestling. Now he's got to bulk up. Now he's got to change his lifestyle to fit pro wrestling. What stories were you told about that transition from baseball to wrestling? And was it hard? Was it easy for him? Was it maybe easier for him because his dad and brother were already in it?
Yeah, so it's two questions, right? One is like the transition to just learning how to wrestle and
Right.
and work around the ring. That came pretty easy to him. He was by far the best athlete almost anyone knew, even in minor leagues. Even Pete Rose was like, he was an incredible athlete. He was fast, he was strong, he was quick, he was agile on the base paths. So when he moved into wrestling, it was a very natural progression. I found some cool quotes in like 1975 Tampa newspapers where,
Dang.
even Dusty Rhodes was commenting, like, when he first saw him in the ring, you could tell he had something. He moved so gracefully. He was an athlete. He was a high flyer. But back then, he was a string bean. He was way too small to
Mhm.
do this. So from a worker standpoint, it was a pretty easy transition. He knew how to, from baseball and the reps at the plate and the reps and the reps throwing the ball and all the drills you would do. It was very easy for him to I'm not saying easy like he did it quickly, but easy for him to turn that focus into, okay, I'm going to take 1,000 monkey rolls. I'm going to take 1,000 jumps, and I'm going to figure out the timing and all the things that happen when you're in the mat. The second part of the question is the physique, which you mentioned,
Right.
which is, it's crazy. I mean, think about it. That any 22 or 23-year-old, or when you were that age, if someone's like, look, in order to chase your dream, you're going to have to figure out a way to put on 50 pounds, not fat 50 pounds. Like, you kind of need to be
Right.
jacked to do this. And it was an incredible thing. He has quotes where especially from interviews he did in the ICW, that where people asked him because they would remember him. He stayed in that territory for a while when they would come down south, and people would ask him, like, well, I saw you a year and a half ago. You were playing minor league baseball. I don't even recognize you anymore. What did you do? And he's like, he says, one of my favorite quotes is, he said, I decided to take up weightlifting with a religious fervor. I lifted as heavy and as hard as I could, as much as I could. He pushed all the weight limits. He went after it, and in addition, of course, which I think from what Lanny explained and a couple other guys, like the he was maniacal about his protein and calories, and it was just an endless amount of steak and eggs and
Yeah.
protein shakes. And back then he followed the early 70s bodybuilding diet, which did include anabolic steroids. I mean,
Mhm.
Arnold did them, all the bodybuilders did them back in the day. It was sort of just part of your routine. And then when they became illegal, almost everybody I spoke to said he stopped like everybody else did. But that certainly helped, but you don't gain 50 pounds just by, steroids will help you on some
Right.
level, but he was incredible. I mean, they had all they did. I talked to Rip Rogers, who was like his roommate early on in the ICW days before WWE, but when he had really made it as, figured out the Macho Man character. I mean, they had weights all throughout their house. They had bench in the backyard. I mean, this is all they did was wrestle, I think he said something like, we lifted, we wrestled, and we chased women. That was what we did for like 3 years straight.
So we talked about, you spoke to Lanny. You said you knew him for about the last 9 months of his career. And so, kind of a twofold question here. Who was one of the most interesting people in wrestling you spoke to for this book? And then maybe somebody outside of wrestling also that you spoke to for this book as well?
Yeah, one of my favorite interviews that I always say when I do these books, and when you're doing interviews like this, authors will ask you like, what is it like to do these books? And or younger authors starting writing will say like, well, how do you do? And I always say that the rule is like, your best interview for the book will almost always be somebody you didn't think of or didn't know existed, not in a negative way. They just weren't on your radar at
Mhm.
all. And
Right.
then someone who you talked to said, you got to talk to this guy or this girl. And that becomes like this amazing, amazing story in the book. And for me, one of the best interviews was with Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff's son.
Oh.
Mr. Wonderful, people listening, was a superstar. He was a Hulk
Mhm.
Hogan rival. He was a rival, Macho famously called him Mr. So-So, which is just classic, like Macho. It's awesome. And so imagine being an 8-year-old kid in the mid 80s. Your father is, bodybuilding level superstar, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. His buddies are Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and Andre the Giant. And your dad takes you with him as much as he can to travel, when school's out and all these things. So his son was on the tour buses in between cities with all of you. Get on the bus with his dad, and it's like Macho's in the back, and Hulk's in the left, and Andre's on the right, and Junkyard Dog's in the corner. And this was what they did. It
Crazy.
was like, yeah, it was crazy. And so he just said that, Randy treated him so well. He was one of the only guys who, everybody was nice, but he was the only guys who
Mhm.
talked to him like a person and like, how's this, how's that, like a real conversation, and really connected with him and stayed in touch with him throughout, their life after Mr. Wonderful left wrestling and
Wow.
Randy went off to do his own thing. And so that's probably my favorite sort of insider. And I talked to a bunch of wrestlers too, but that's
Mhm.
like the most unique perspective ever as an
Oh,
8
yeah.
year old in that world. And then outside of wrestling, I talked to a lot of people just from his, school, and just from his, kids who were just friends with him in the neighborhood and stuff like that. And those were really interesting. But probably the most fun one was I talked to this woman who was an extra in Spider-Man when he played Bonesaw
Oh,
McGraw. And she was on set. She was one of the Bonettes, if you remember the movie. Like there
yeah.
was these women holding like cardboard saws as his character. And that, that was a whole different part of Randy's life. He'd been out of the
Mhm.
spotlight for a while. And she was just like, he was cool as hell on the set. Like, you're not supposed to ask for pictures, but he would let you take him on the side. He was all about like helping out the stuntmen with the wrestling and how it's going to work and how this is going to go. And he would finish the set and, finish his shoot, and it'd be like, he used to carry around these protein contain like a container of like just grilled chicken, eating it like a snack just to keep his weight up. So that's just a totally unique, again, like the unique perspectives are the ones that
Oh,
you
yeah.
want. So I guess those are two that come to mind with that question.
So the one big question is, why now? Because you said you always wanted to write the Randy Savage book. You finished 1996. That book comes out and everything, and then you say it's time. It's now's the time to write the definitive biography, as you call it, of Randy Savage, because nobody else has. So
Yeah.
why was now, after writing, like I said, you finished 1996, that book comes out and everything. Why is now the right time, and maybe not earlier was a better time
Yeah,
to write this book?
I mean, maybe earlier. Look, if I was in control of how it all went, this book would have probably come out last year or the year before. I had the idea for it around probably 20. Well, I've always had the idea of writing the
Mhm.
Macho Man book, but for anyone listening, if you're an author, there's a lot of stages that have to happen. I mean,
Right.
anybody can just write something, but if you're going to do it right with a real publisher or through, I have an agent and all those things that happen in the creative field, the first thing you start is a proposal, pitching it to publishers. You get an advance, you get paid to do the book, and then the research, and this. So there's a lot of steps that have to happen. I spent that year, like I mentioned, getting in touch with Lanny. Um, I wanted to make sure I was. This is like a Mount Everest. When you do a book on someone who's such a
Mhm.
public figure, and I had done a few. I did a biography of Charlie Ward. Heisman Trophy winning, national championship winning, at Florida State quarterback, and then plays point guard for the Knicks and plays in the NBA Finals, again, something that I don't think we'll ever see again.
Right.
And a couple guys, Nate Robinson won 3 dunk contests, and at 5'8", like that had never been done at the time. And so when you tackle these things, I know the time that goes into it, and I wanted to make sure I had the chops basically to do it. And so I wanted to do this. The idea came a while ago, and then 1996. The whole point, not the whole point, but one of the reasons we were timing 96 out was the 25th anniversary of 1996,
Right.
which came out, I guess, what would it be 21? I don't do public math, but 2021 or whatever year it was. Um, and so that kind of got moved ahead of Macho just because I wanted to make
Okay.
sure I was out for the 25th anniversary of the year that I was doing the book. And we were pitching Macho towards the end of that. And that's where I won't say lost that year, but that's where that year took place. If things had worked out really differently, and maybe 1996 didn't sell, or there was a lot of interest in Macho first, maybe I do this 5 years ago. I don't know. I felt like I was ready to do it. I did this book called Hoops Heist on the Seattle Supersonics, which was just a massive undertaking on a whole franchise. I did it, with Isaiah Thomas, who's from that area, with his publishing imprint, and Gary Payton, and we interviewed everybody there who mattered, and Kevin Durant and all this stuff. But that was like, one of those 350-page like monster books, and it was really well received, and it did great. So after I did that, I felt like I was really ready to tackle Macho. But again, things happen with creative projects and writing and publishing, and so I guess that the real answer to right now is because I was ready and the time was right to do it. And then WrestleMania 40 tie-in is perfect.
Right. So you go through this whole book, and beginning you talk about yourself a little bit, but towards the end you talk about more of your process and stuff. And one of the things that really got me as a father was you talking about going on that trip with your daughter. And when you got to the tree where Randy Savage, for like better terms, passed away, died,
Yeah.
and how you were trying to explain to your daughter what Randy Savage means to people and this and that while you're on this journey. And it sounds like, she's not understanding. She goes, oh, okay, he was the guy people like, this and that. But when you got to the tree and she saw the tree and everything there, was it just like it clicked right away for her from what you had already told her, and then her seeing this? Or was it more like she saw the tree and you still had to more explain it? Because the way the book writes is she sees that tree and it's just like, oh, wow, I get it now.
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, the best part about this book that I'm glad everybody seems to be really enjoying it and having praise for it, and that is the most gratifying thing an author can have once the book is out into the world. But personally, the reason I will always remember and cherish this book is because of Macho and what he meant to me and all that. But from like my life standpoint, what I'll remember is that my son who's 9, who's 9 when I started this and is now 11, watched everything with me. He's a diehard wrestling fan. He watched all the WrestleManias and all the YouTube clips and all the old Piper's Pits, and I read all the WWE magazines with me and filmed all my goofy promos with me. Like, really got on board being a Macho Man fan, and that was great to experience with him. And then the second thing, not in order of importance, but the other thing is my daughter loves going on road trips, and we love having a good time together. And so I took her with me to Tampa. We live in South Florida, about 3 hours, 3.5 hours from Tampa, where Randy spent the last maybe half to third of his life, and even was there throughout much of his career. And so when we went up there on a research trip, I wanted to see the house that the condo that he lived in Tampa for most
Right.
of his life. And then, he after he moved out of the public eye, he bought this very secluded house on an acre of land surrounded by woods, like a do not drive, beware of dog type place where you don't want to go anywhere near there. And then in addition to that, his gym and some other places, but also when he passed away, he hit this random tree that his wife at the time, like, really was kind of a hero, saved a few lives. He had a heart attack. For those who don't know, he had a heart attack while driving and slumped over a wheel, was about to cross a 2-lane highway and just slam into other cars coming full speed the other way. She leaped over the seat, was able to get his foot off the accelerator and yanked the wheel, and they actually went to this tree on this guy's property, but it was off the road, and she saved a couple people. The people who saw it definitely said she saved several people's lives. Anyway,
Right.
all that is to say, the car came to rest. Randy was dead on the spot. He died of a heart attack in the car. The car came to rest at this tree. So it's a very hard tree to find. There's no marking. There's no
Okay.
stone. You have to like go on Google Earth and then compare that with like, the police reports and some descriptions from the scene. And if you Google enough, you can kind of find close to where it is, but it's not easy. And it's just a tree. I mean, there's no way to know about it. So we're driving up, and my daughter's excited about, I have cousins up there we're going to see. And we're listening to Taylor Swift. I told her she can listen whenever she wants, and we're stopping to get junk food and fast food, all the fun dad stuff. And as we're getting closer, she's like, "Do you think it's like what do you want to see there?" And I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. There might be nothing there. We might pull up and it's just a tree. I'm like, he died 13 years ago at the time. And I don't know, like, we'll see. This is what you do. You just have to see. This is what you do when you write a book. You just see
Mhm.
what you see and you write about it. Maybe it'll be nothing. Maybe it'll be awesome. She's like, "What do you think?" And I was like, "I don't know. You know, people love this guy. He was a staple of this community, a staple of a generation of wrestling fans. He means a lot to people. Maybe there's something there." So the whole time, you know, being an 11-year-old, oh, it's just a tree. Like, let's just go see the
Mhm.
tree. We hit some traffic, of course, and it's like, you know, I'm just sitting in traffic to go see a tree. You know, being a kid.
Right.
Finally, we get close, and then it becomes more of an adventure because I'm like, I don't really know where this is. Like, so she's holding the map and my phone with some pictures of where the intersection might be and all these things. And finally, we're going down this two-way street, and I'm like, I think that's got to be it up there. Like, there's the church in this one picture, and there's this CVS, and there's this other thing, and this looks like the guy's house in the background. And finally, I'm like, that's it. So I have to do a U-turn, and I pull over on the grass where it is. And I'm like, what do you? I'm like, she's like, well, what are we gonna do? I'm like, let's get out. Like, we'll try it. And as we get out of the car, or maybe it was right before we got out, you can see like these purple tassels like flailing,
Mhm.
definitely weather worn. And we start walking a little closer, and you see like some other things flailing on there, and like there's like a couple stickers of sunglasses on the tree, like Macho sunglasses. And then all of a sudden, she just starts running, and she's like, "Dad, look!" And there's Slim Jim stickers, you know, thumbtacks all over there. And then at the base of the tree, next to a bunch of stickers, are two Macho Man figurines. And like she just like got it. She's like, somebody just
Nice.
put them here. Like somebody put Macho Man. How long have they been here? I'm like, I don't know. And then you look on the back of the tree, and there's more stickers, and it was like it all hit her. And then the kind of piece de resistance to this whole thing is I was like, well, let's go knock on the door and see, like, maybe this guy was home. Like, this is a great story if we can have it. She's like, you can't just knock on someone's door. What if it's a stranger and this? I'm like, we'll see. And it turned out the guy was like gardening next door,
Mhm.
and he like waved and I waved, and he's like checking out the macho tree. And I was like, yeah. And I kind of told him what I was doing and writing a book. I said, were you living here or were you around when it happened? And he's like, this is my house. That's my tree. I was here when it happened. How can I help you? And then you just like
Wow.
my daughter was just like asking him questions. I mean, it's all recorded and stuff. And so it's exactly what you want. Not only you get that rush of it as a writer, like, oh my God, this is a source. No one's talked to this guy. It's gonna be amazing for the book. But my daughter got it. She understood the whole
Mhm.
trip was worth it. After we got in the car after that, she's like, I can't believe he was home. I can't believe Macho hit this. And I can't believe all these news crews are on. And the excitement, it was just like she gets it. And so that was like just an awesome, awesome moment for me as a writer, and then for me as a dad.
Yeah, because like I said, as a dad, that part resonated with me. I've got a young daughter and stuff. I have a boy and a girl, but like I have a daughter as well. And I've had those moments with her where like I try to explain something to her, and then all of a sudden, once she sees something, she just gets it. So
Yep.
I really connected with actually that part of the book itself. But just to wrap everything up, where can people find your other work? Find the book again. It is Macho Man, the Untamed, Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage. Where can people buy the book? Where can people get it, pre-order it, and find more of your work as well?
Yeah, the home base for everything is my website, jonfinkel.com, JONFINKEL.com. Go on there. The first thing you'll see is the sign up for my Books and Biceps newsletter. That is the home base of all my content. I send a newsletter out every Friday. It's a pretty good size now. It's almost 14,000 people every week. So I do a book recommendation, author interviews with a lot of my friends who are authors. So I only recommend my book once a year when they come out. The rest of the time, it's other authors' books. I do Q&As with them all the time. It's like I mentioned earlier, I lift a lot, so a lot of meathead motivation. I interview fitness people that I know from my background, and so sign up for that. That gets freebies and all these kind of things with Macho and other books. And then on Twitter and Instagram, it's at JON_Finkel. Follow me there. Share it if you get the book. I get all these giveaways if you send me a screenshot of the order. And yeah, we're trying to chase down Becky Lynch right now. We got the Macho Man versus the Man. Her autobiography came
Right.
out and she's awesome, but you know, we're competitive. We're trying to get there. So if you're listening to this, orders matter in the first week or two, so feel free to buy it and help us out, and let's spread the madness.
Well, with all of that, I want to say thank you for joining me here today, John. I had a great time talking to you about the book. I enjoyed reading the book and everything, and I hope everyone does go out. And is there going to be an audio version of this book? That's my last question.
Yeah, there will be. It
Okay.
should be out soon. As you can imagine, we had to make sure we found a reader who could do the
Mhm.
macho voice passably
Okay.
in the sections that needed to be done. So I offered to do it, but my macho is not sustainable. I don't think so. We're gonna. It should be out soon. I think in the next week or two.
Awesome. Because I know for me, normally, if I want to read a book, I'm not the best reader, so I usually go the audiobook route myself.
Yeah. Yep. We'll
So
have one.
awesome. So with that, I want to say thank you again for joining me here. And yeah, hopefully everyone checks out the book, reads the book, or listens to it once the audio version is out. And so for me, this Pro Wrestling Unlimited, have a great day, guys.